Hello. So in this video, we're going to talk about Kelly Marie Bradley's Where Pumpkin Spice Lattes Come From. This is a quite short book. There's probably about 37 words in it. So most of it, I mean, we've got illustrations and then very short captions, right? It's basically sort of like a children's book, but I think based on the art style, clearly not intended for children. So we've got these sort of sexy alt-punk goth type girls on most of the panels. Right, just consistently going through. There's not a massive story to it because there's so little text. Basically, the premise is that in the autumn, pumpkin spice season returns, and pumpkin spice comes from the murder of pumpkins. Right, so pumpkin slaughter here, pumpkin slaughter there, pumpkin slaughter everywhere. So this is the idea, right? And we have this character named Charlie the Pumpkin. And as it says here, Charlie the Pumpkin woke up with a sick feeling in his stomach. He dreaded this time of year. Charlie the Pumpkin does not want to get murdered for pumpkin spice lattes. Understandably so. But he meets this woman. So it says here, Tiffany enjoyed pumpkin spice lattes, but respected pumpkins. And so they meet. Tiffany met Charlie and he felt so lovesick he made her an organic pumpkin spice latte. So this becomes the alternative to slaughtering pumpkins, is that the pumpkins will just vomit up pumpkin spice lattes. And so this apparently solves the problem. Everybody is happy. They get to hang out together and give children candy on Halloween, etc., etc. It is an almost shockingly beautiful love story based on overconsumption and vomiting as an alternative to mass slaughter. So, in terms of, again, it's a quite short book. There's very little here in terms of storyline development, character complexity, etc., etc. But it engages with some interesting themes. One of which is this sort of question of violence, right? This idea of the ethics of violence. And the last panel, apart from little jack-o'-lantern saying the end, so cute, is Happy Halloween, remember to be kind. And in a way, that's sort of the most, I think, straightforward and obvious moral of this story is about the importance of kindness, right? And I think this is actually where things start to get complex, even though it's quite a short book. And a lot of the things that I'm going to talk about are not necessarily sort of overtly developed, explicit ideas, but they are implicit in this injunction to be kind, because the question becomes, what does it mean to be kind? To whom do we need to be kind? And in what larger sociocultural context do we need to be kind? And I'm not going to challenge the idea of kindness. I'm pro-kindness, so don't get me wrong on this. But when we start thinking about this question of pumpkin spice lattes, slaughtering pumpkins, in this case personified as pumpkin people, then it raises these interesting ethical questions, one of which is about overconsumption. And this is a really striking one, because pumpkin spice lattes, for those of us sort of old enough to remember when they first became massive, pumpkin spice lattes became a sort of symbol of, on the one hand, basicness, which of course is deeply encoded with sexist assumptions, beliefs, worldviews, etc., etc. And I mean, again, every non-pumpkin, non-child character in this is female. There is a strong, ongoing cultural link. I guess we got a couple of adult men in this one, but for the most part, this is women in this book. And there is still, of course, a culturally sanctioned link between consuming pumpkin spice and particularly young women. So there is, of course, the sexist element there. But the other sort of strand of critique of pumpkin spice lattes was more an anti-capitalist one, right? In the sort of vein of, oh, this represents this sort of hideous consumerism and this mass marketing that tricks us into buying things we don't really need, etc., etc. And as has been pointed out by others, and quite correctly so, the implication that this is primarily an issue with pumpkin spice, as opposed to a broader issue of virtually everything within a capitalist culture, is incredibly misleading and gets pressed into the service of sexist dismissal of things that young women are typically or are more likely to be enthusiastic about. But this is a reality, right? Pumpkin spice, and I love pumpkin spice. I get obscene amounts of pumpkin spice when it's available. This morning I had a pumpkin spice bagel with pumpkin spice cream cheese and pumpkin spice creamer in my coffee. Yeah, sue me. I don't care. I like pumpkin spice. Anyway, but this idea that somehow pumpkin spice is uniquely or atypically representative of the capitalist ethos of getting us all to continually buy and consume stuff we don't necessarily need and that perhaps isn't super good for us in many instances. This is a problem with the discussion around pumpkin spice. But pumpkin spice and the mass marketing of pumpkin spice is part of that situation, right? So this is the sort of balance here that I'm trying to make clear, and I don't think I'm making very clear. Pumpkin spice and the marketing of it does represent this really problematic component of consumer capitalism, but it does not represent that in a way that virtually everything else in our society doesn't. So in this sense, there are always issues of commodity fetishism, consumerism, marketing, etc., when we're talking about something like pumpkin spice, because that is part of the discourse around pumpkin spice. And so I think there's an element to that, right? The question of what consumerism drives us to do to other living beings, to non-living natural resources, things like this. This is sort of implicit in here, right? The idea of pumpkin slaughter everywhere represents this sort of destructive force of consumer capitalism, and this sort of notion that even if it requires this sort of hideous destruction of other lives or non-living resources we must continue to consume constantly. And in the context of where pumpkin spice lattes come from, because it deals directly with the slaughter of living beings, in this case, pumpkin people, probably the most direct and overt comparison is the consumption of meat. I don't know whether Kelly Marie Bradley is a vegetarian. I don't know whether she's vegan. I don't know whether she set out to write a story that would represent a vegetarian or vegan ethos. But in critiquing a system that leads to the mass slaughter of, in this case, pumpkin people, but living beings, in the interests of rampant consumer capitalism, there certainly is a pro-vegetarian, pro-vegan read to this, right? Because you think about, especially things like factory farming in the US, where animals are kept in incredibly dirty and inhumane conditions en masse, so that the huge appetite for the flesh of living beings can be satisfied in this country. And a lot of it comes down to overconsumerism. And a lot of it comes down to this is the most profitable way for companies to operate, for agribusinesses, large agricultural businesses to operate, right? Is to keep creatures in inhumane conditions, to treat them terribly, and then to brutally slaughter them so that we all can eat them. And I will say I'm not vegetarian. I'm not vegan. I do eat meat. I eat more meat than I should, probably. I do basically agree that ethical vegetarianism or veganism is the morally correct thing to do. But because I live in a society that constantly surrounds us and presses us to eat meat, and I don't have that much discipline to resist that, I do that. But again, this is a book that sort of is interested in that kind of idea, right? Of like, what are the stakes of hurting other living beings in order to consume them? Is that an ethical or justifiable thing? And I think the book itself, because again, it ends with Happy Halloween, remember to be kind, it does come down on this side of vegetarianism, veganism, right? The idea that we are not justified in slaughtering other living beings so that we can consume them. This is an ethical evil that should be resisted. So yeah, and I think that's quite a good message.